Hey, Skull Good Guys here, and I'm gonna go against the grain to bring up a major game design discussion in the world of fighting games, that being on the subject of motion inputs, the established way of performing special moves in fighting games, standardized all the way back when Street Fighter II first released in 1991 to this very day. Though ever since the release of Street Fighter VI's modern controls, as well as upcoming major releases like 2XKO and Invincible Versus removing them altogether, a massive schism has been formed between those who are not opposed to this new direction fighting games are appearing to take, while me and many others feel that motion inputs should stay in fighting games. To me personally, this is just an unnecessary and rather detrimental attempt to try to force accessibility into fighting games. I mean, what if they decided to change the game of baseball, to where instead of having 4 bases, there's now 3, to try to get more people to play the game? Or if in chess, they decide to get rid of the king piece in order to lower the barrier of entry to the game? Or if first-person shooters decided to remove the need to aim your gun, in an attempt to get more individuals engaged with the game? I know, right? Doesn't that sound really dumb? Kind of foolish? So why the hell should fighting games be treated any differently? So what, so a game could supposedly sell more units? So people who have no interest in the game or the genre won't just drop it faster than they normally would? Well, I'm gonna go through with you all some major points that I've been able to find against the usage of motion inputs in fighting games, and I'm gonna counter them all with facts and logic. Call me any ist, phobe, or what have you, or tell me how uneducated I am. I don't care. This video will be an actual discussion on game design, so if you don't want to provide any constructive criticism, just do us all a favor and leave the video now. I don't want to get into any needless verbal confrontations. Enough jabbering, let's have an actual discussion on why motion inputs should stay in fighting games. Reason number 1, the need for accessibility. The biggest reason to remove motion inputs from fighting games is the need for quote-unquote accessibility.
We need to rethink our current means of making fighting games, or the genre will never get the recognition it's been yearning for. The one that not only the developers of these games want, not only what many players who already indulge in them want, but what the masses want too. If not, it will remain a niche little genre for only the people willing to look past its faults if we don't have the balls to admit them. Do you want to see your favorite genre flourish, or will you glaze it into the ground and watch it remain a sideshow, denying all the people who want to play it the will to get through the door?
This is an absolute load of horseshit because nowadays, fighting games have never been more accessible. There are countless YouTube videos, forums, and guides that aim to help you get better at your specific game of choice as fast as possible. Unlike back in the arcade days where you had to actually go out to places like SoCal and New York City to find some of the best players available if you really wanted to get serious at your game of choice, or hunt down VHS tapes with all the combos, tech, and what have you. I do, however, agree that fighting games do not do the best job at teaching their mechanics to new players.
1 plus 1 equal 2. 1 plus 1 is 2. And you get 7.44. What the flip?
Oh, you guys aren't used to this?
Okay, now I give you a test. You have 90 seconds. Okay, go.
Well, most of the time. Though I feel that this is an issue with the developer's teaching abilities rather than an apparent issue with the controls themselves.
I can tell you already, the movement is looking great. I love it. I love it. I'm also curious to know, like, what were some of the core design philosophies that went into this game? Like, now that we're getting a chance to see it in action here.
So, at an initial level, it was making the, characters feel as good as humanly possible, open up options for the new players like I've talked about with the rush combos, and then, having one button specials to just let you instantly start unleashing your arts and just kind of get into the game. You can see, currently Killua is constantly using that sort of that upward jump kick special move that he's got a couple of different flying kicks on top of having the chains, and really his options are kind of more for long range. So I'm surprised that the Kurapika player was willing to get that offensive that quickly.
And yes, I do accept that some players would prefer a more streamlined approach to these games. And I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing. Not every video game has to be balls crushing hard. It's just that in recent years, the devs and the publishers who bark orders at them want to eradicate the depth of the genre that we love so much in ill-fated hopes to get more sales. Remember now, when shareholder is happy, shareholder won't go to black market and hire hitmen to shatter your kneecaps. Not to mention that there are matchmaking systems in place now that better match you with players of your own skill level. Unlike the prior days where you just found matches and hoped not to get perfected twice in a row by a no-lifer in their parents' basement. And now we have modern releases like Tekken 8 and Fatal Fury City of the Wolves, featuring AI that can gather player data to create CPU opponents for you to fight against, ones that can match way closer to your own skill level rather than your typical fighting game CPU, as well as grow alongside you as a player as your knowledge of the game increases. So nowadays, it's not a big deal if your modern game of choice doesn't have a large player base 5 to even 10 years from now, or a lot of game options beyond just your standard arcade mode, training, and online casual and ranked. Because so long as you have a stable enough internet connection, you can continuously be able to improve and have fun at the game of your choice. Even if you can't do things like spinning pile drivers, raging storms, or Korean backdashes. So let's say we finally remove those pesky motion inputs. Now what? The game will have to balance out all the moves, so what you'll have to do is introduce a bunch of other system mechanics to balance those moves out. Just look how well that turned out for Guilty Gear Strive. Dumbing down the inputs of all the characters, introducing a whole bunch of bullshit Roman cancel variations that serve no real purpose whatsoever, not to mention that stupid wall, halting gameplay and wasting everybody's time in the process. And ArcSys still cannot make a game that matches their prior endeavors in terms of depth and creativity, all in the name of appealing to modern audiences, in more ways than one mind you, but that's a later discussion for another day. Reason number 2, motion inputs are dated and unnecessary. Another major gripe with motion inputs is the apparent need to modernize newer fighting games, because motion inputs are supposedly from a bygone era of quarter munchers.
Motion inputs were designed when getting people to come back to an arcade cabinet over and over again was the best way to make money. So locking some of the coolest moves in Street Fighter 2 behind an input that required frequent practice made everyone collectively piss themselves in excitement. But arcades are now as dead as the point-and-click adventure genre, and most people play fighting games at home, so we should have really bitten the bullet by now and moved away from motion inputs completely. But when you learn how to perform Hadouken in Street Fighter, the only times you can ever use that muscle memory again are in other fighting games. No other genre uses a quarter circle forward or a dragon punch motion for basic actions, and because of this, it's simply less efficient for overall gaming enjoyment to learn Street Fighter over Call of Duty.
Despite the fact that fighting games, beat-em-ups, and shmups are some of the last few genres that still incorporate arcade-style gameplay in this modern age of gaming.
There is nothing quite like the simple button-mashing arcade game. It takes your mind off problems. You rely strictly on impulse and hand-eye coordination. And for a short period of time, you're free to beat up thugs on the street. The gratuitous feeling of pure button mashing is a relief, but the thrill doesn't last long, and the game is anything but deep.
And it's not that they didn't understand it, it's that they didn't want to understand it. It isn't like a misguided attempt to try to see what's going on with these games. They just outright reject what this game is doing as a premise.
The thing is, a lot of these dated and cumbersome mechanics that game journals and those unfamiliar with the genre want to point out all the time are still in fact in modern games, albeit more simplified than in days past, but they're still here to stay. And just think of how all FPS games as we know them today evolved from Wolfenstein 3D and the original Doom, still requiring you to have to aim and shoot at your opponents in game. Sure, you can offer criticism over the hit detection of FPS games compared to games past, but the act of playing a first-person shooter is still very much alive. And you don't hear players say that aiming needs to be removed from these games because of how outdated it is, or how it doesn't make the game accessible to wider audiences. Sure, you could argue that first-person shooters come more naturally to people because more people are accustomed to guns as opposed to martial arts. But hey, there are some people who have never even seen a gun and struggle more with a first-person shooter as opposed to a fighting game. I'm also gonna go out on a limb here and say that the majority of players, whether pro or casual, don't want to play an FPS game where you just move, jump, duck, etc., and the game will aim your gun for you, making the only thing you'll have to do is to press the trigger button on your controller, or left mouse click if you're playing on PC. But outside of the practical side of motion inputs, there's also a vintage appeal to them as well. Just like vinyl and CDs, you can always find arguments for why you should use those mediums instead of, let's say, Spotify or Apple Music or any other digital platform. And they'll still use the traditional media because they will feel a stronger connection to their music through it.
Vinyl, way more expensive, way more variables. But in my opinion, it's worth it. Because every time I drop the needle and it actually sounds great, I chuckle to myself, because on paper, there is no way that this should sound good. There's too many variables. It's a format that literally degrades every time you play it. And it degrades your cartridge, or at least the stylus. It's a consumable, but that's why I love it, because it shouldn't sound good, but it does.
Just look at how successful Metroidvanias and roguelites have been in the indie gaming scene. They still give complex mechanics and obstacles for players to get through. And don't even get me started on the Soulsborne games, creating their own subgenre of hard-as-hell adventure games that have become widely successful across all demographics, all of which are immensely popular despite having dated and non-hand-holding direction. So fighting games should not be treated any differently. Reason number 3. Motion inputs pose a great obstacle for the disabled. One issue that comes with advocating for motion inputs is that on Blue Sky I'll be labeled as an ableist. To that I say I don't care, because there are more options than ever before with those with physical disabilities to be able to play video games, and not just fighters. I mean, the pro player Broly Legs, rest in peace by the way, was able to become the #1 online ranked Chun-Li player in the whole world, and the only way he could play fighting games was with his face, since he suffered from arthrogryposis. So don't you dare tell me that it's not possible for anyone to pull off a spinning bird kick with motion inputs. Not to mention that there are more and more controller options available than ever, accommodating all kinds of players, regardless of physical ailments or pain. Just look at the sheer quantity of leverless controllers on the market, aiding those with wrist pain and other hand-based issues that could come from playing stick or pad. And with the amount of controller possibilities available for the community to create thanks to GP2040 CE, the open source firmware compatible with a wide array of modern devices, with little to no input lag like the PCBs from Brook, but at a fraction of the cost. Not dissing Brook or anything, because their PCBs and adapters are fire, and I have purchased their products multiple times, but it's nice to know that they're not the only game in town. There are even controllers that allow you to use foot pedals, which could have those with difficulties with their fingers, and Microsoft of all companies are surprisingly forward-thinking in this field by making a mass-produced adaptive controller which can finally give people with severe disabilities the ability to finally play video games with their limited mobility. Sure, there's additional accessories you could buy too which are not included with the controller, but hey, I feel this is definitely a much neglected field in the controller sphere. All of these options are great for those who believe that traditional arcade sticks and standard pad controllers are not a good fit for them, whether it be physically or just preference. I mean, just try to advocate the use of anything other than a standard NES controller in competitive Tetris, or advocate for the use of aluminum baseball bats in Major League Baseball. You would just get laughed at at best and be told to cope or rope at worst.
Jackson with a broken bat, one hopper, right back to Aldridge, and the Royals are out.
So again, don't you dare say that motion inputs are a real barrier, like pay-to-win mechanics in gacha and trading card games, where money becomes the true determinant factor in winning or losing. Reason number 4. We need to bring in more players. The biggest yet most baseless argument to why we must remove motion inputs is the supposed need to bring in more players for our scenes.
No matter how much you want it to play like the previous game, it's not going to play like it. And you're going to have to accept that. And play in that environment if you want to keep doing this. They don't move on because they're so stuck in their idea of what a fighting game should play like. I feel like a lot of this is because the Western world's discourse is very flawed. We don't talk about fighting games intelligently enough.
I say quote-unquote need because apparently despite the rapid growth of the FGC since the Street Fighter 4 days, and major tournaments having up to 5,000 plus entrants for individual games mind you, we still need more and more people. 99% of the time, motion inputs are never really an apparent detriment for fighting games for most people. Unless you're Yahtzee, who is hella opposed to anything that is not a single-player game.
Another opening paragraph in which I try to explain what the I think I'm doing reviewing a one-on-one fighting game, when I think fighting games are for people who drink undiluted syrup and enjoy core mechanics reminiscent of having to repeatedly and very quickly enter the combination on a high school locker door with some pictures of bikini girls on it. Would one designer say, well, obviously we should map every character's specials to the same simple button inputs so everyone's on equal footing and it can all come down to reflex and strategy? And another would reply, no, I think we should also be testing their ability to very quickly open bicycle locks while being sodomized.
9 times out of 10, they'll just go to their storefront of choice, see a cool game with characters they like, pick up the game, and proceed to fight the CPU, or their friends while mashing buttons, as well as enjoy any other single-player content that the game has to offer, or have a quick 5 to 10 minutes of fun. Even if you remove all the motion inputs from your game, many casuals will still not take time to learn the game's mechanics outside of getting their opponent's health to 0 and not perishing in the process. If anything, the removal of motion inputs will stagnate the game across the board, and for those who are invested in this game and going to tournaments, they will get bored and go back to play an older game that has the depth that they're looking for. What I'm trying to get at is for players who are dedicated to these games, they will do everything in their power to keep them alive, or at a grand scale for as long as humanly possible. And even with the most popular games out there, player counts will continue to lower over time because, let's be real here, nothing lasts forever. Eventually a new game or two will come out and then it will grab everybody's attention, leaving everybody to ditch the game they're currently playing and move on to the next one. Sure, they may come back every now and then, or the new game could suck and then they just go back to the game that they like, because like anything revolving around predictions in the future, it's all up to fate. Even with these live service games supposedly being meant to be continuously updated forever and ever, eventually the devs will run out of new things to add to the game, the publishers won't see value in maintaining servers, and they'll just pull the plug and then move on to the next project. Though a major issue in the modern era with fighting games is that they're in this awkward middle ground between standalone game and games as a service. You'll get all the basic offline functionality that the game can offer, arcade mode, local multiplayer, versus CPU, etc. And ever since the release of Street Fighter V, it has become standard for companies to introduce more regular updates outside of just re-releasing the same game over and over again with new characters and other goodies, as well as other publishers featuring daily login rewards that you can earn through actively playing their games online. Or in Street Fighter 6, you could be impatient, pull out your mom's credit card, and then get to play as Ken with a yellow color palette. Also, up until recently, these major fighting games have been regularly released in arcades in Japan as well as other Eastern countries well before their releases on home consoles. I mean, for crying out loud, Tekken 8 was the first game in the series to not release in arcades completely and just stick to home console and PC. And ever since arcades started dying across the world outside of Japan and Eastern countries, fighting games have been converted from shipping as a good to a good that is also a service. Though, unlike the majority of live service games, the publishers will not remove your access to these games once the newest entry comes out. Typically. At least, I hope that's the case. Hashtag stop killing games. Reason number 5. Motion inputs prioritize execution over strategy. The major argument made in favor of motion inputs by veterans of the fighting game community are that motion inputs don't show your actual skill with the game itself, allegedly.
I think people think of execution and they get upset because they think if I don't have the ability to execute, I'm not playing Street Fighter correctly. I'm not getting into the strategy of the game. But having things you can and can't execute in the game influence what kind of decisions you make, what kind of characters you pick, influence what kind of combo routing you choose to do. That is the strategy of the game. And if this is not something you care about, then you don't have to do it. I also don't expect that this is going to be that hard, you know?
And that people tend to associate their skill with these games with the ability to do dragon punches and fireball motions, while neglecting the game's deeper mechanics, frame data, what have you.
There needs to be easily some crazy consolidation made in that situation because it's already easy enough to mash out a DP. That thing's already easy enough to do. To summarize this, I'm kind of fine with fighting games giving people options. In fact, I think more options are kind of the better in terms of accessibility in fighting games. But the same way I feel about auto combos is the same way I feel about no more rolling motions, no more charges or whatever. Everything goes to essentially smash inputs, which is neutral, back, forward, and down, and maybe up with just one button. I just press forward button and I get a fireball. As long as there is a reward associated with doing the manual input, then we're good. But if we get down to the nitty gritty and suddenly a fighting game comes out and you can do both, but one's there just for legacy and everyone else gets to do the other ones. That's kind of where I genuinely disagree. People actually think that doing special moves makes you good at Street Fighter. No. If this guy is doing easy special moves, no. Because you know how to do special moves does not make you good at Street Fighter. So modern controls upsetting people comes from a mentality where you feel like doing special moves is what makes you good at Street Fighter. Literally not that. What makes modern controls good is like free cross-cut DPs and also being able to do supers with one button. That is good, okay? Modern controls that made them good, dude, they outzoned me. They played proper spacing and footsies. They teched my throws. They DI'd my ass in the corner. So to me, the entire argument against modern controls is completely bogus. I'm fine with it if people are just playing the game.
But what if I told you that execution is tied with strategy? Let's take a look at bowling, for example. There are 10 pins you need to knock down. You got 2 chances to do so that round, except the very last round where you have 3, but I digress. Anyway, some examples of things you can strategize include your position before you roll the ball as to not pass the foul line, the direction in which you're about to roll the ball, the angle in which you roll the ball, how fast or slow you can swing your arm to roll said ball, will you position your wrists at an angle to build momentum to get tricky sets of pins. And those were just some of the things I could come up with at the top of my head, and I'm about as basic of a bowler as you can get. So what I'm getting at here is that motion inputs are just as integral to the strategy of fighting games, no differently than any other competitive activity. Often in fighting games, you have to factor in the power of the move itself, which the motion input helps balance out. Because let's say you're gonna do a basic Shoto combo, jumping heavy kick into crouching light punch into dragon punch. You'll need to evaluate how much time you have between attacks and factor in the speed at which you can pull off the moves. If you remove the motion input, there will be a lack of flow, which ends up breaking the fundamental rules of the super move's abilities, which forces everyone to adopt very similar styles of play in the process because it just becomes pointless to do so otherwise. That's why with Street Fighter 6's modern controls and City of the Wolves' smart controls, you are forced to lose tools. Because if you could have all the same tools as classic controls and not have motion inputs balance everything out, you'll just see everybody stick to modern controls, which gives us all less options, which can get you in the door, but will just hurt you in the long run. Though with these tools available thanks to motion inputs, you can mix and match to create new ways of playing the game and continually adjust the game to better cater to your knowledge of it. The only real comparison I can give here is learning your multiplication tables instead of just using a calculator. Sure, using the calculator may be faster and save you time initially when you're like a kid or whatever doing your homework, but when you're in the real world and you need to be able to keep track of a lot of different things on the fly, you will need to know how to do basic multiplication, addition, subtracting, and dividing.
Do you know how many dimes there are in the dollar? Make up $1.
A dime is the 10 cent or the 5 cent?
You tell me.
I don't know.
How many dimes make up $1?
1,000 or 100? 100.
Yes.
And you can already see with kids who are not forced to study their multiplication tables being unable to perform their jobs effectively as adults, which will lead them to get fired because they lack the basic skills that everyone expects them to have, which quite literally applies to everything from engineering to stocking shelves at your local grocery store. Yes, I know that this is an extreme comparison to give, but I feel that this is true to fighting games as well. Because if you don't know how to do motion inputs for special moves and you refuse to learn, you're going to be bulldozed in by those who take the time to do so, or who have already taken the time to do so. Reason number 6. A simpler game does not mean a more profitable game. Outside of the mechanical side of gaming, the financial side does not work in favor of simplification equaling bringing in new players. Just look at Marvel vs. Capcom 3/Ultimate Marvel 3. Together they both sold 5.5 million copies worldwide, and most say that Marvel 3 is a pretty complex fighter. And let's take a look at its predecessor, Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. They lowered the team size from 3v3 to 2v2, reintroduced the Infinity Stones so they can be a crutch for new players, because Capcom did not learn their lesson the first time with Street Fighter Cross Tekken, as well as make the concept of assists essentially meaningless.
The active switch or active tag mechanic is the heart of this game. It replaced the assist system from previous Versus games. Before, you had to pick one of 3 assists per character. Now, any move can be an assist. The tag is also an attack. If you press nothing after tag, the incoming character will have an active hitbox on them and perform a tag crash. This is one of the best moves in the game. It is insanely plus on hit and on block. This means that you can tag mid-combo and continue the combo easily, and means that you can tag in a block string and continue applying pressure without losing your turn.
And even with all these new features, the game bombed hard. And you want to know why? Because they didn't bother to include fan-favorite characters like Magneto and Wolverine. Not to mention all the gaslighting attempts to get people into thinking that they don't care about the characters themselves, but rather their functions. Not only that, but the game had graphics worse than a cheap mobile game, despite releasing on, at the time, modern consoles, and came out shortly before an actually good game made by Arc System Works called Dragon Ball FighterZ, which delivered an experience with beloved characters, solid tag team mechanics, and beautiful graphics capturing the look and feel of the anime in a 3D format. And now Disney is getting Marvel to work with ArcSys on that Marvel Tokon game, eradicating all hopes of a Marvel vs. Capcom 4. A proper Marvel vs. Capcom 4, mind you.
But Skull, Smash Ultimate sold over 36 million copies worldwide and is the best-selling fighting game of all time. And since Smash doesn't use motion inputs, would it really be that bad for more traditional fighters to do so?
Yes, I will not deny the fact that Smash Ultimate is a massive success. But the factors which led to the game's success are not simply due to just removing the need to do motion inputs. Besides Ryu, Ken, Terry, and Kazuya, this game was advertised to be the definitive Smash Bros. Experience with the largest roster of characters a platform fighter could offer, even managing to bring back all the game's prior entrants, which to be fair is rarely done in games in general, having multiple DLC characters from beloved franchise make an appearance in the game, most of which have some of the most dedicated fan bases of all of gaming. To be honest, I would have never thought that Banjo and Kazooie and Sora would make their ways into Smash ever. But hey, Sakurai was able to make the impossible possible, and the game simply had lots of content to keep all kinds of players busy. You had World of Light for those who like RPG experiences, you had online for those who wanted to go pro and get better at the game, and you simply had the option to turn on all items and mess around with your friends. Now let's take a look at the colossal flop that was Multiverses. The game had very solid gameplay mechanics at first, beloved characters from across several of Warner Bros. IPs, and regular feedback between the developers and the wider gaming public, not just those who were into fighting games. But the game failed in the end due to many aggravating factors, such as multiple in-game currencies that you had to convert constantly in order to make in-game purchases of any kind, which confused several players in the process, predatory in-game monetization that preys on children, since this game was rated E10+, similar to how casinos and online gambling sites prey on those with addictive tendencies. That's why you gotta hook them while they're still young. Yeah, like that's ever gotten any company in trouble before. Removed playable characters when they became too overpowered, even though people spent money on these characters, as well as starting life as an open beta. And they had the audacity to charge microtransactions even though it was not a finished game yet, only to delist the game for a year to finish it. Mind you, this is the first time that they delisted it, as well as remove all the content early access players had access to so they would be forced to buy it again. Not to mention remove the ability to play the game offline, which is a death sentence for any competitive game in the fighting game community. Oh, and then they decided to delist the game again for a second time, though this time for good. Which is why making a game simpler for the masses cannot simply increase sales. Making a game more complex can even increase sales, believe it or not. I mean, League of Legends originally started off with 23 champions in its original launch, and now there's almost 200 for you to choose from, jumping the player count from 35 million monthly active users to now around 130-something million active monthly users. Or Warframe, having a bare bones online multiplayer experience, having up to 20 to 30,000 active players on a regular basis initially, to then getting as high as 180,000 plus players, with new expansions and classes being released routinely. And that's just with Steam alone, not factoring in console players and those who play on platforms like the Epic Game Store. What I say is not set in stone, because things could change, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty darn sure that the removal of motion inputs will not impact the sales of fighting games. Reason number 7, motion inputs balance out the moves of the game. A major aspect to the design of fighting games that people failed to comprehend is how motion inputs balance out these games, as I mentioned earlier.
Juggling hundreds of items and character abilities is closer to knowing frame data in fighting games than it is to motion inputs. Landing headshots in shooters is akin to having proper spacing in whiff punishing. There really isn't anything in either genre that closely emulates the challenge presented by motion inputs. Fighting games are not inherently harder, but they are uniquely challenged in a way that makes them less approachable to new players. It's really not that hard to see where the friction is coming from.
Let's consider how a fighting game character gets designed. You'll need some form of movement, attacking, blocking, and if you're really fancy, some form of fireballs or projectiles. Not really that much different than any other game with combat when you think about it. And a lot of games initially tie their character's mechanics to a single button press. You press A to make Mario jump, you press the left mouse button to make Doomguy fire his shotgun, you press the Y button to open up your menu in Final Fantasy, and so on. So why should fighting games require you to perform an additional motion, while at the same time press a specific button? Well, motion inputs have been a staple of gaming since the very beginning. I know I'm all up in that tinfoil drip right now, but let me explain. In Pong, or Tetris for 2 for those who know their gaming history, you have to move a dial up and down to position a line on the screen in order to knock a pixel in a specific angle to your opponent's side of the screen. In the original Donkey Kong, you had to precisely move Mario and hold down the jump button at the same time to land jumps at specific angles to not fall and lose a life. In Joust, you have to hold the joystick while moving in the direction you choose to then press the jump button to launch yourself at enemies. For crying out loud, FIFA, of all games, has motion inputs in it. Not to mention that EA can continuously sell the same game over and over again without really any major changes and still be able to turn a major profit. If one of the most mainstream casual games ever conceived that sells millions of copies every year, ranks in millions upon millions of dollars, has some of the most casual fan bases imaginable, can get away with using motion inputs, why can't fighting games? And I can go on and on about this in many other games, but if I were to do so, I'd be here all day. All you need to know is that if you remove the process of doing a motion input, you will get moves coming out faster than what a human is capable of, which is the major reason why macros are forbidden in tournaments, and are widely accepted as cheating across all skill levels, which is why in Street Fighter 6 every patch continuously adjusts modern controls way more so than classic controls. When the game was originally launched, characters using modern had a 20% damage decrease, but now it's a 24% decrease, meaning that this push for a more simplified control scheme by the developers directly clashes with how Street Fighter has been played for over 3 decades now.
It isn't just that everyone has access to their moves. Instead, it's somewhat the opposite, where each character is designed from the modern standpoint up to have all of their moves. Let's take a look at some of the charge characters of Street Fighter 6, like Blanca or M. Bison. Notably in the past, these two characters have had multiple charge moves where a player had to hold a direction for a certain amount of time and then press the opposite direction and a button to perform that special move. However, when Bison released, things seemed a little strange. Bison had an insanely good drive rush, his walk speed wasn't exceptionally slow as it had been in the past, and his scissor kick special was turned into a regular quarter circle motion input? The answer is pretty clearly because when you build a character from the ground up with modern controls in mind, they can't have more than 2 charge moves. To perform a charge move in Modern, all you have to do is hold down or back and then press the special button. Because of this method, you can only have 2 charge moves per character in Modern controls since there is no way to distinguish which kind of button, like a punch or a kick, is pressed after charging. It isn't just that everyone has access to their moves. Instead, it's somewhat the opposite, where each character is designed from the Modern standpoint up to have all of their moves.
本当にモダン操作っていうもの自体がイージーモードというかという考えではもちろん我々はなくてですね、そのモダン操作でも活躍できるような大会に出てモダン操作で優勝してくれる人が出てくるようなものを目指して作っているっていう感じですね。
Don't ask questions. Just consume product and then get excited for next product.
And if this keeps up, it'll get worse from here. Reason number 8. Fighting games are supposed to capture martial arts in game form. Just like with traditional martial arts, fighting games should require some form of execution. I say this because when you're in real life and you try to do judo throws or roundhouse kicks, when you start off, you're gonna fail and get your ass handed to you on a silver platter. But if you continue to practice and learn from your mistakes, you can be as sturdy as a tower and throw your foes like a rag doll, which is a reward in itself. But unlike martial arts, there's an element of fantasy in fighting games, just like how wrestling the sport is vastly different from things like WWE. But the act of performing physical attacks one-on-one is an aspect of fighting games that cannot be easily replicated by any other genre of game. Sure, there's 2v2 modes in games like Smash Bros, and some other games have 3v3 tag team mechanics, but for the most part, fighting games are meant to be fought 1v1. When I say 1v1, I mean one human versus one other human, just like in traditional martial arts settings. And with anything that's 1v1 initially, there will always be a winner and a loser.
Success in a game is simple. It's static. Failure is dynamic and granular. Failure is what makes skill expression possible, not success. If you make your game perfect and people can be perfect at it, there is no skill expression. There's no meaningful difference between anyone. Everyone is the same. Failure is the only state of individuality. Failure is the only way to distinguish one player from another player.
Which, to be fair, is a bitter pill to swallow since it could be infuriating for you to try your best only to lose to someone who invests more time in the game than you. Which is why people tend to like team-based games more since they can shift the blame onto their teammates as opposed to themselves, despite whether or not their teammates are performing worse than them, thus causing the team's losses.
Let's get into it. Duo play works a bit like tag team wrestling. One player controls the champ on stage, and the other waits off screen for their teammate to find the right moment to tag them in. In our last update, we showcased some of our tag mechanics, all of which were designed from the ground up to encourage teamwork. Sharing in victories, defeats, performing combos together, or saving your partner in a clutch moment are just some of the new ways you can experience the game as a duo.
A lot of y'all asked us hey, I want to learn this game, but I kind of want to learn the support role. I want to help my friend, but maybe not be the star of the show when I really haven't taken the time to learn the game or learn a specific character and not have all that pressure on me. So we listened, and so we came up with this fuse called Sidekick, where the character that you start with on point, they never switch out. However, your friend can come in and perform an assist.
And we cannot deny that just like in real fights, your opponent may have knowledge of a particular style that you may not have, and you may have no clue on how to effectively defend yourself in any capacity whatsoever. So motion inputs serve as a knowledge check across all skill levels, no different than in any other form of competitive activity.
You can do stuff like this, or like this. It's over the top, but it's incredibly rewarding. I can use my natural instincts to shoot players through the wall, and if I know what I'm doing, I can even kill them, which I see as some form of skill. Because wallbanging is scarily efficient, you feel less safe behind corners. And gotta be honest, I love that part of the game. It further increases the skill gap by opening up another layer of combat, but I know some people might not agree with me. 1.6 simply owns in terms of movement, how good it feels, and what you can do. CSGO will never get close to this, since that would make the skill ceiling of the game higher, which is not what Valve wants. They want CSGO to be a game that everyone can play without pushing anyone off the side, so they can promote microtransactions to everyone.
If you remove the need to get better at something, you remove options for people to engage with that subject. And the less options a game has, the less longevity it will have. Just look at narrative games like Life is Strange and Uncharted. They aren't known for having the most in-depth system mechanics, so when people play through the story modes of these games, and maybe another playthrough or two to get the alternate endings, they'll just drop the game and move on to something else. Nothing wrong with that approach to game development, but that same mentality makes fighting games get dropped even faster. Because the only reason why Smash and other platform fighters have been successful in eliminating motion inputs are because they shift the complexity to platforming. If you want to get better at Smash, Rivals 2, Nick All-Stars 2, or any other platform fighter in general, you'll need to develop the spatial awareness of the whole arenas you'll be fighting in the game, as well as potential pits that you can fall into, as well as knockback from certain attacks. Things that are completely foreign to 99% of 2D and 3D fighters. Case in point, if you're really hell-bent on removing motion inputs from your game, you're going to have to do a lot of trial and error in order to get this to be able to work when replacing established forms of game design that have been around for decades. Which is a major reason why new technology, like VR for example, struggles to keep up with standardized game mechanics that have been around for the past 20 years. The only VR game that I've been able to see that has been able to keep up with standardized game design is Half-Life Alyx. Games like this are very few and far between right now, and it will take a very long time for technology and software to be able to catch up. Reason number 9. Fighting games need less players, so a smaller player base should be expected. The biggest reason for a need to push for more players in fighting games that I have seen are the player counts of these games. Because it is true that fighting games, compared to other genres of games, have less active players than other genres like first-person shooters and MOBAs. But this push isn't really necessary because, simply put, fighting games need way less players than other genres. I say this because when you look at a game like Call of Duty, for example, you play on 2 teams of 8, meaning that you need at least 16 players per online game minimum, whereas a fighting game typically only needs 2 players per online game. Of course, there are issues such as matchmaking, bots, hackers, skill gaps, long queue sessions, rage quitting, internet disconnections, and many other due to the nature of technology and player behavior, but those issues can be found in quite literally every online multiplayer game that has ever existed. I mean, just ask yourself, when playing a game like Street Fighter 6 or Tekken 8, have you had to wait any longer to get into a match than any other major multiplayer game? Odds are you did not, unless it's a game that's older or which the developers have left to pursue new games. So this need for new players is more or less a want for new players, to have a wider array of people to play against, or to better find people who are around their skill level. Which I'm not saying is a bad thing to want, because it is nice not to have to hop onto a Discord server to try to find somebody to play against manually. But keep in mind that fighting games are just smaller in general. They take less time and money to develop than other genres initially, though patches, characters, game modes, and other features do get added with funds through DLC, microtransactions, and season passes, outside of what funds are given to developers outside their company and/or publishers. Not only that, but they typically have lower marketing budgets than games of other genres. Simply put, not every game can be like Fortnite and just appeal to the lowest common denominator, because they put a bunch of pop culture icons and celebrities in the game. And that's just something a lot of people in the fighting game community are just going to have to accept. Just look at all the backlash the FGC had towards City of the Wolves for adding in Ronaldo and Salvatore Ganacci. Another weird example I'll give is coffee. There is a ton of variety in coffee, yet not everyone drinks it. But for those who do, there's all kinds of drinks that you can have. Sure, you have your standard fraps from Starbucks as well as basic black coffee, maybe with a little cream and or sugar, but there are other coffee variants such as espressos, cappuccinos, americanos, and mochas to name a few. Not to mention the different kinds of beans used to make the coffee, whether it's served hot or cold, and the list of options goes on and on. If someone really hates coffee and would rather drink anything else, why should we have to change coffee so much in order to get non-coffee drinkers to be able to drink it? To me, I would replace hating coffee with hating motion inputs, and those who would rather drink anything else as those who would rather play anything other than a fighting game. In the end, casuals will pick up a fighter, play it for a bit, then move on to something else. And that's okay. Not everything in life is meant to be hardcore. I mean, it can be if you want it to be, but it doesn't have to be. And I think that a lot of FGC members will have to accept this fact and try not to ruin the integrity of fighting games for everyone else. Because to them, this is all an attempt to shill games because they cannot win tournaments otherwise. And they want to justify playing video games all day as a viable career path with hopes of finally ditching their dead-end jobs at Arby's or wherever the hell they work. No offense to those watching who work at Arby's or in fast food or minimum wage work in general. You are awesome and I hope you're doing well. Thank you for listening to a boomer trapped in a zoomer's body yell at the clouds for 10-something minutes. Feel free to share your thoughts and feelings in the comment section below. Remember to support your locals, make your bed, eat a vegetable, and I'll see you all again next time. GG's.